Hello guys, and welcome to our front-end web development course. In this class, you're going to be learning about common CSS properties. My name is Damilare from Rice Academy. As you know, to create CSS styles, one of the first things you would need to do is to create your style sheet, and your style sheet is denoted by a .css extension. So when you look to the left of my navigator here, you could see an index.css file. The next thing to do is to link this your CSS file to your HTML document. Your HTML document has a .html extension like you see here already. Now to do the linking, you use a link tag. Here, the relationship of the linking document, which is a style sheet, to this HTML document is style sheet. You are telling HTML, I'm linking a style sheet to you, and then the href talks about the location of the style sheet. Since they are relative parts, you would see that you could easily point to the index.css file using a /path. This is saying, oh, I'm linking to index.css, and what that means is every style you put here, every reference you use for an HTML element in the CSS file will update the style for that particular element. To proceed, the first CSS property we want to consider is color, and we'll be adding that color to these two tags, the username and the password tag. So we have the label for username here, the label for password. You remember, to target elements, you could use the element name, you could use the element ID, you could use the element class, you could use the element attributes, and several other combinators possible. For simplicity, we are just going to be using the label element directly, and what that means is if I put the label element here in my CSS file, label, I open and close a curly brace, this style, any style I put within this curly braces will affect this label, that's for username, and also this label for password. So let's go ahead and use the color. Now before I proceed, there are multiple valid formats for color values. However, the most common ones are X values, RGBA, and named colors. Now this is what I mean. X values, RGBA, and named colors. To get X values, I normally use a color palette, which is a Google Chrome extension on my browser. But there are several ways you could get colors on the internet. You could Google and choose from whatever palette you have. So I have an extension here called Pick Color, as you can see, or Color Picker, and it will show me different color shades, which I can then proceed by the right ear to choose the X value. The X value for a color would always start with a pound symbol, or what you normally call an hashtag. So having something like this, I could just click on this and it would copy the X value. I come back here and I add the X value as the value for my color property. What happens when I save is that the label now changes to that particular X value. I have overridden the default browser color for my label element. By default, most typography, most text that will be rendered by a browser will be rendered as black until you override it, except for texts that are anchor tags, which will be blue, showing that you need to click it to link to another HTML document or website. Okay, let's proceed. RGBA. If you go back to this color palette, you'd also see that we could have used the RGBA color value instead of the X color value, and I proceed to do that. I'll be explaining what this does in a jiffy. RGBA CSS function. By the time you write RGBA and you put these values in a bracket, you're saying the red value should be 24. That means it will be fully red, green 14, blue 18. It is not completely red. It has some shades of green and blue. If you want completely red, then this will be 0. This also would be 0. And then the last value in RGBA stands for alpha. And what the alpha value does is just to check out the opacity. Opacity is how faded it is. So having this, we have a very full red. Now, I want you to observe that opacity increases in or decreases in fading from 1 to 0. What do I mean? So if you have opacity of 0, this color and the text that has this color would not even show at all. Look at this. You cannot see username and password label anymore. Then if you do 0.2, you would see it, but it would be faint. 0.4, you would still see it, but very faint. 0.6, you would see it, but very faint as well. And as you go up till you get to 1, it keeps getting clearer, and then by 1, it is very clear. So for whatever reason you just have elements on your website that you don't want to be too bright, you could use the opacity or the alpha value to control its fading or its brightness. The last way to add colors to CSS is what we call named colors. You could simply have just written red if you are not concerned about opacity, and you'd have this. You could have written blue and you would have this. You could have written green and then you would have this. The next CSS property we want to talk about is your fonts. Your browser would certainly give you default fonts, but you know, most times you would realize that the designer that you're working with has a design in mind, and that is the design he wants to use, and that design also comes with fonts. When that happens, one of the first things you need to do is to look for the name of that font and find a way to download it, or you ask your designer to give you the font folder so that you can download it. I will just show you how I normally would have downloaded a font from the internet, or how I would have used it from Google Fonts, and then we'll proceed. I go to my browser and then I go to 1001freefonts.com. There are several websites where you could get very good fonts. I'll just be picking one of these so that we can move very fast. Let me know if there's one you like. I think I like Middle North. And then the next thing I'll do is to click on download. I already have a fonts folder in my website. As you can see, I have an images folder, I have a fonts folder, I have my HTML folder, and I have my CSS, my HTML file and my CSS file. Why I have folders for fonts is because I might have multiple fonts that I want to use. Same with images. So I'll proceed to download these fonts in my fonts folder, Middle North Const. Then I go ahead, it has come in as a zip file. So I would unzip it. I'm using a Mac OS. I'll extract it. Now I have my font file. As you can see, this is this font is .otf, but there are other formats. You could have .ttf, you could have .woff. They are all valid font formats. The next thing I would now do is to tell my website to start using this font for whatever element I want to use it for. If I want to use it for everything, I will add it to my body element, or if I want to use it just for the labels, I will add it to the label selector that is already here. So how do we add this font to our website? I go to index.css and then I use what I call the font face family rule. This is how to add fonts to your website. You put it at the top part of your CSS file, and this is how to do that. You write app font face. You open your curly braces just like you would have written a CSS style, and then you'll be seeing what I'm doing here is the same thing up and down. Probably I should just write it down not to confuse you. At font face, the next thing you want to write is the name you want to be calling the font. What's the name of the font we just downloaded? Middle North. So let me just say Middle North. You can call it any name, but whatever name you call it here is what you will reference it with in your HTML or CSS file. Then I come down. The next thing is SRC, which stands for source. How can I locate this font from my CSS file? And that is very simple. You use what you call a URL function in CSS. As you can see, URL, it would have an opening and a curly opening and closing brackets, and then you do a relative naming again to find its path. So I'll do dot forward slash hold on. Fonts, yeah. Can you see the fonts folder? And then in the fonts folder, you can find middle knot constant.otf. I'm sure you can find this. Now, when we go ahead, for me, I would have preferred to name it in such a way that there is no space in between it so that it doesn't confuse you. And I'm going to be doing that right away. I'm going to do middle knot dash or underscore. Then I come back to my CSS and change this to underscore OTF. Now, anywhere I want to use that particular font, all I need to do is go to the label. For example, let's use that font for this label. Come to the label and just say, you can see that we've defined several font family. I defined black stars before now. I have also defined middle knot. So I can tell any of my elements to use any of these font families. I just come back here. So at font face is for defining font family. Then font family itself is to choose the font family you want to use from one of the ones you've defined from at font face row. So I come here and I say font family. Then I go ahead, I use middle knot. Now look at what happens. My username and password, they have now changed to the font I just downloaded. That is one way to use fonts in your website. You will download the fonts physically in a folder on your website that you can point to, or you can go to Google Fonts. For Google Fonts, you are not downloading it. You are just using a link, and the link would download it from Google Fonts Content Delivery Network without having it physically on your web server. So there are several fonts that Google has already made available, and I'll just pick let me pick Kome. When I pick Kome, I'll click on the plus icon here. As you can see, I'll click on the plus icon here. I can click on this. I can add as many fonts that I want to add. These, as many that I had. Then I'll need to go ahead and copy this, then add them. For now, let me just use only one to make it simpler, and I'll be adding this to the link tag in my website. As you can see, I already have a link tag here that I use for my CSS. I would create another link tag, but this time around, this is linking to the Google CDN for my fonts. When I save that, I can go ahead to use this font family now in my website. So for the body, instead of using Arial sans serif, I'll come here and use this new font that I just downloaded from Google Font CDN, which is called Kome. You remember the name is Kome. That is the font family to use, and it has already been specified here that if you would use this font, since you are not downloading it, we have already defined the font family name as Kome sans serif, and that's how you should use it. So here you cannot define your family name. It has been defined for you by Google, and when you save, you realize that it has changed. Take note. Let me change it back to the previous one. And I save. Can you see how bold it is? Then I go back to what I just did and I save. Can you see the new one? That is how to download fonts or how to use fonts on your website. The next thing I'm going to be considering is font sizes. I'm just going to be telling you how to use the pixel unit to make your fonts bigger or smaller. Now you see that it's very difficult to see our labels, username and password. To make it bigger, we can easily use the font size property. Font size property, and we're going to be using pixels. Pixels is a unit of measurement. There are several units of measurement, but for now, we'll focus on pixels. And then we could have 25 pixels. It becomes bigger. Can you see? I can also still say 35 pixels, and then it becomes bigger again. So the higher the number, the bigger your font. The lower, the smaller your font. The next thing I want to talk about is your background color. That's another common CSS property. When you look at this submit button, it's an input element with type submit, and we already made the background color black. I can as well go ahead and change this background color to green, or I could pick an X value like we had for color, an RGBA, or a named color. Yeah, thank you. The next CSS property we want to consider after background color is background image. So let me go ahead and use this div here to drive on my point. The div I have here, the ID is wallpaper. So let's select div with ID wallpaper. Remember, to target an element with ID, you use the pound symbol or hashtag and then the name of the ID. Here it is wallpaper. I open and close my curly brace. First of all, I would like to give this div an height. So let me give it a height of 200, right? Pixels. Pixels is a very common unit for dimensions in web. And then I give it a width of, I could have given it a width of let's say 200 pixels, but let me give it a width of 100%. Okay, let's stick with 200 pixels for now. Now this div here with ID wallpaper already has a space here. You would see that there is now a space between login form and username. It's for the div. But why you are not seeing anything is by default div does not have a solid border, so you cannot see the border around it. But yes, there is an element here that is taking a space of 200 pixels by 200 pixels in height and width. To prove that, let me now add a background color to this background color, and let me give it a background color of aqua. I save, and then I have something like this. An element with width of 200, height of 200, and a background color of aqua. The next thing I want to add is a background image to this wallpaper. And to add background image, you use background dash image as the property name. Now to add an image in CSS, you would use the URL function again. The URL function basically is used to reference an image file by URL. So I do this URL, open and close bracket, again my relative path referencing, I do /. Now the image I want to use is in my images folder. Then I go to images, and the name of that image is cat.png. I have this. Whoa, beautiful. So now I have a background color in my div, I have a background image in my div. I could have put anything I wanted in my div. So I would have this text in my div, and whatever I do here will just be on top of the image. Why? Because the image is just a background. Can you see that? The image remains a background. I could have removed the background color to have only the image, and then I have this. Okay. The next thing I want to do is to add background position. Lest I forget, for the background images, there's something very important I want to show you. You could have multiple images side by side. So as I have URL here, I could have another URL again with another image. Okay, so that is by the way. The next thing I want to talk about is your background, your image size, background image size. So come here, let's see, background size. I could say 50 by 50. That is the width and height. 50 pixels. Sorry, 1 minute. By 50 pixels. And then I now have a cat, a background cat of 50 pixels by 50 pixels in dimension. I could also have used a percentage of the parent element. I could have said, oh, it's 50%, and then this cat will just take in 50% in width of the parent, 50% in height of the parent. That means I would have 4 of such cards. But if I don't intend to have 4 of such cards, I just want a card of a particular dimension, then I would have 100 pixels by 100 pixels, and the card by default will continue to repeat itself until I ask it not to repeat. It would repeat itself to cover its parent as a background. Can you see this? Oh, beautiful. Okay, if I use another, there are several values you could use for background size. Let me just try out a few other ones. If I do cover, it will cover the parent. But as you can see, I can't see detail. But if you do contain, it will stay in the parent. But if there is need to show another part of the image of the background image, it will show it up. You know why it's showing it up? Because our position, we are starting from left bottom. If we are starting from left top, the full first card will be on top, and the other card that is not full will be below. What other thing do we need to check? Background repeats. So let me return this back as 50 pixels or 100 pixels by 100 pixels. Now I have a cat that is 100 pixels by 100 pixels, but it is repeating by default. If I don't want it to repeat by default, then I use the background repeat CSS property. Background repeat, and if I don't want it to repeat, I use no repeat. If I want it to repeat X, I needed to see this. Background repeat, I will do repeat X, and then see what happens. Sorry, repeat X, and then it will repeat horizontally. If I do repeat Y, it will repeat vertically. It will continue to repeat that same image of the same size and the same position severally. But if I do repeat, it will repeat both X and Y, that's horizontally and vertically. When I do no repeats, it will only give me just that image alone. Now that I have just that image alone, I don't want it top left anymore. As you can see, I don't want it top left anymore. I want it center. So I come here and I change my background position to center. Look at what happens. Beautiful. I'll just quickly talk on the background position here. As you can see, after giving this background image a size, we use the position center. If we want it in other positions, we could do left top, then we save. We could do right top, then we save. We could also do right bottom, then we save. Left bottom, then we save. Now that I have all these background properties, I could have what I call a background shorthand property, and I would put all of this together in it at once. My background shorthand property will take in a few background properties. It can take in background color, background image, background position, background size, background repeat, background origin, background click, and background attachment in that order. Now let me hide this. Just watch me for 1 minute, and then I come here. I have my background property, and then the first thing I want to define is the background. That's the background color. So I have black. Take note. Then I'll put a space. The next property that background takes in by default is the image, background image, just in the order I have it here. So you come here and then you have your URL function. It's a string that takes the path of the image. That's your cat.png. Then I go ahead, another space. Can you see? I have my background position. I want it to be center, right? Now, if I'm going to be having background size together with background position, it's not compulsory you have all of these background properties together. You could just have this alone, for example, and you're fine. Can you see? You can just have only, in fact, you can remove the color and just have only the URL. You still be fine, as you can see, right? But if you'd be adding the background size to this shorthand property, you must use a slash after the background position. That will tell the browser that, oh, I'm about to write the size beside the position, and then you could have 100 pixels by 100 pixels. This is how to write the background shorthand property. I don't like this. Oh, okay. Let me change this to 100. Beautiful. Now the next thing you want to do is add a background repeat, so that it does not repeat like this. Then you go ahead, another space, and you do no repeat. Now everything we've written here in how many lines? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is what we've written in one line. So if you would like to have a shorthand for all your background properties, you can use the background property alone. It would not have background dash color, background dash image, background dash position. It will just be background, and there you can add several things. And like I said before, now I repeat, you can have one of all of them. It's not compulsory you have all of them together in the background property. For example, you could just have background black, or you could have just the URL, or you could have center, or you could have just the size. But if you are going to have them all together like this, the background position and the background size must be separated by a slash. Thank you. The next what's it called? The next CSS property I want to talk about is the border and the border radius. Let's take our input element, for example. Again, I go back to here. I have my inputs. I want to increase the width and the height, so I make the width 100%. Let it take the full width of its parent, and then I make the height 300 pixels. Oof. I meant to say 100. I'm sure 100 is even big. 50. Oh my, 30 pixels. Perfect. Now, border simply defines how curved the edges are, and if you would like to have an idea of the documentation for whatever property you are writing, after writing it, just place your cursor on it, over your cursor on it, and you see the definition of that property. It says shorthand property for setting border width, border style, and border color. Just like background, let us start with the border width. Border dash width. You want your border to be as thick as the value you put here. So if I put 3 pixels, what happens to my inputs? They become very thick, the borders. These are the borders. You remember in your CSS box model, I said every element is seen by the browser as a box that has a border. Inside the border you have paddings, outside the border you have margins, and the border itself has a width. Now you can make the width very thin or very thick. 5 pixels is thicker. Can you see that? Now the next thing I want to talk about is your border width, then your border style. Border dash style. There are several styles here, and we'll be considering them one by one. Dashed, dotted, double, groove. Let's leave the hidden out. Hidden would not show it, so let's see dashed. Can you see your inputs? They now have dashed borders. We could have dotted. Can you see your inputs? Dotted borders. What other one do we have? Let's check it out. 1 minute. We have double. Oh, beautiful. We also have groove and ridge. Okay, take note of the differences. We have ridge, and then we have solid. Solid is the default, where it's just one thick line that runs around. So we now have our border width, we have our border style. The next thing, hold on please, the default value is none, sorry, but let's have solid for now. The last thing, the last border property we want to consider is the border color, right? The border color. Just like color and background color, you could use X value, RGBA, or named color. So we're going to be doing this, and then we have that particular border color. We could do red. Whoa, this is terrible. Let's do green. Okay. Okay. Border width, border style, border color. Now, we can as well use our border shorten property just like our background shorten property. And that will be defining these three guys here. So let's comment them out. To comment in CSS, as you know, you would have a / and a star, and then a star and a / to close it. Anything between those two / and stars would be commented out, and your browser would not see it. So now we can have our border shorten property, border width first, 2 pixels. Next is the style, dashed, and then next is the color, green. Now we have our border in this form. The last thing I want to talk about quickly is the border radius. I come here and then I had a border radius property. Just like font size and border width, you can see use pixels since it's a unit of measurement in CSS. And when you have 5 pixels, take note of what happens to the edges of all your input elements. Hovering on border radius would show you the definition. It defines the radii of the outer border edge. I have this, and then I have something beautiful like this. Can go ahead and make it more curved. Now I have 8 pixels. Can go ahead and have 10 pixels. Then I come here, I change this to solid. Okay, beautiful. Thank you so much for your time, and have a great day.